In our study of Yehoshua up until this point, we had the last thing we had done was the end of chapter 12. This is going back to the end of the summer, right before the Elul, and we did a bit of a break to study Sefer Yonah. This is the last subject we had covered in Yehoshua was what we refer to as Shirat HaMalachim, the song of the 31 kings that Yehoshua and the people of Israel had conquered, and in the conquest of the land of Israel. And more or less, by the time you get to the end of Parak Yud Bet, you get a sense that the conquest of Israel, Yehoshua led the people into the land, and he brought them through the Yarden, and he brought down the city of Yericho, and then there was the Brit with the Givonim and the battle with Ai, and then you had two subsequent major battles, one in the north, one in the south, one in the north. And by the time it was all over, 31 kings of Canaanite kings had been conquered, and Yehoshua leads the people into the land, south and north, and he's sitting in the camp in Gilgal, and more or less Israel has control over the land itself. By the time you read the summary parak, it starts, Elah malchei haaretz asher hika Yehoshua b'nei Israel be'ev hayarden yama. The list of the kings that Yehoshua and b'nei Israel had smitten and conquered on the east side of the Yarden, on all the regions of the land, and it gives you a list of all the kings. And so Parak Yud Bet ends with this kind of a song of victory, this march of Yehoshua and the people, and you get a sense that this is really a very a significant moment in the Sefer. And then we start Yehoshua Parak Yud Gimel, and right away we know something's very different, because it starts with the phrase V'Yehoshua Zaken Ba Bayamim. Now Yehoshua was old, advanced in years. V'yomer Hashem elav, Ata zakanta bata bayamim, v'haaretz nishara harbe me'od lemishta. You, Yehoshua, are old, advanced in years, and the land remains very much unconquered or uninhabited, unsettled. Lemishta. And then the Navi is going to digress for a moment to tell us what parts of the land remain still unsettled, uninhabited by the Israelites. Zot haaretz hanisharet. This is the land that remains. Kol glilot haplishtim, all of the regions of the areas of Eretz Plishtim, v'chol hageshuri, in the entire region of the Geshur, which we'll talk about in a second where that is. Min hashichor asher pnei Mitzrayim v'yad gvul hakron tzafona laknani techashev, all of the region from Shichor by Egypt through the advance to the city of Ekron and northward, it's all Canaanite. Chameshet sanei Plishtim, and the 5 leaders of the cities of the Plishtim, Azati, Ashdodi, Ashkolani, Giti, Akroni, Ba'avim, the cities of the major cities of Eretz Plishtim, Aza, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gat, and Ekron. Miteman, and then from the south all the way up north, Kol Eretz HaKnani, U'me'ara Asher HaTzidonim Ad Afekat, Gvul Emori, all the way up to Tzidon, Sidon in Lebanon, along the coast. Ve'aretz HaGivli, and the land of the Gval, which unclear where that is, we'll see in a moment on a map. V'chol HaLevanon, Mizrach HaShemesh Mibal Gad Tachat HaChemon, all of Lebanon, down to the Chemon, Ad Lebo Hamat. All of the region of the hill from Lebanon to Mishrefot Mayim, Kol HaTzidonim, the land of the Tzidonim. Anochi Orishem Ibnei Israel, I will drive them out from before Israel. Rak Hapilel Israel B'Nachala Kasher Tzviticha. But Yehoshua, you need to throw lots, you need to draw the lots, you need to divide the land as I have commanded you. And therefore, therefore Yehoshua divide the land, divide the inheritance between the 9.5 remaining tribes. All right. So I'll come back to the 9.5 in a moment. But what is going on in all of this description? And this is really just sorry, I have to fix one little pitch. Okay. What's going on in this description? This is an introduction to what essentially is the second half of the book of Yehoshua. The book as a whole divides very neatly into two parts, possibly three parts, but certainly two major sections. Everything we've studied up until now, chapters 1 through 12, are the conquest, are chapters that relate to the story of the conquest of the land, what Chazal referred to as kibush, the conquest. And in that context, Yehoshua gains military control of the land. But the camp is still in Gilgal, and the people are still encamped in and around this area, and they are not settled in their tribal territory because the land has not yet been divided amongst the tribes. Right? It's all one land and it's one army, but we don't yet have the land of Judah and the land of Benjamin and the land of Manasseh and the land of Ephraim and the land of each tribe, so they don't necessarily know where they're going. And so the camp is in Gilgal, and the army is in Gilgal. And Yehoshua is commanded here at the beginning of chapter 12. God says to him, the land is the beginning of chapter 13, the land is for the most part, oh my God. Yehoshua is like, right, land is for the most part unconquered, unsettled, l'rishta. And here we have to make a note in language. L'reshet is different from l'horish. L'horish is to conquer, essentially to take the land for various reasons. So we dealt with the theology of the conquest of Canaan way back at the beginning of our study of the Sefer. L'reshet is to settle, to have as an inheritance, as a portion. And so there's a distinction here between the land that was conquered and the land which remains for the most part, l'rishta, l'reshet, to inherit, to possess. Zot ha'aretz hanisheret. And when you look at it on a map, more or less, this is a map which we will become very familiar with. There are various forms of this map that appear, but essentially the green, more or less, is the area that is described in this text as unconquered or unsettled, I should say, by the Israelites. The tribes of Israel under Yehoshua, and for the most part throughout the period of time of Yehoshua and of Shoftim, the Israelites remain for the most part on the hills. And we'll talk about that at length in Sefer Shoftim. They never really go down to take a foothold in the plains, in the coast, in the area of the Canaanim. They remain for the most part in the hills, which was the territory of the Amorites, and the conquest of the land took place in this region. So the orange, more or less, is Israelite controlled, the 2.5 tribes on the east side of the Yarden, 7.5 or 9.5, if you include everybody, on the west side of the Yarden. The green is the area here that is described as Haaretz Hanisheret. Miluta Plishtim, the land of Eretz Plishtim. There's some discussion about what is the area of Geshur. Is Geshur referring to this area? And here in that source page, I gave you a map, our first map. This is the land of Eretz Plishtim and the Avim. Some suggest that the Geshuri is down here in this region in the south, near Vadi el-Arish. Some suggest that the Geshur refers to a region up here, which we'll see in a moment, the Geshuri and the Ma'achati in the land of the Bashan that was also unconquered by Manasseh. But in all cases, this is the area that's identified as belonging to the Canaanites, as well as the area in the north. And again, that's that map in the north. So Zot ha'aretz hanisheret, this is the land that remains unconquered. the land of the Plishtim, the land of the Geshur, Eretz Mitzrayim, which is probably a reference to Vadi al Arish, all the way up to Ekron in the north, the Canaan, meaning the Philistine area, Eretz Plishtim, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gat, Ekron, 5 cities of the Plishtim. And then up the coast, Mitaman Kol Eretz Knani U'Ma'ara Shilat Sidonim, up the coast of where the Canaanites had control, all the way up to Sidon, which is today we refer to as Lebanon, right? Or in those days, Phoenicia. והארץ הגבלי וכל הלבנון, מזרח השמש, מבלגד תחת החרמון, all of the region in the north up to Bashan, or the Hermon, and down into what is an area of the Ma'achati and the Geshuri, which is, again, here in the north, that remains part of the Canaanite stronghold. And this, more or less, is the land that Israel controls in the orange. And so Yehoshua is faced with a challenge. On the one hand, the conquest went with a minor blip here and there. The conquest of Canaan went exceedingly well. But as is not uncommon, that's only half the story. I was about to say half the battle, but that would be a bad choice of term. That's only half the story. The other half is that they have to settle in the land, they have to live in the land. If they retreat back to base camp to Gilgal, then the Canaanites will simply retake the land that they had conquered. And so that's now the challenge of the remaining part of Sefer Yehoshua, which is to divide the land and to get the tribes to go and take control of the regions that they were assigned. And the assigning of the land by tribe is now the major subject of Yehoshua's remaining years. So essentially, the book divides into two parts. Part one is the conquest of Canaan, and part two is the division of Canaan by tribes and the assignment and the success and or lesser degree, more degree, success and failures of the tribes to settle and control the region assigned to them. But the issue here is to assign it. Yehoshua, you need to assign this land. You need to give it to the tribes. You need to identify which area is going to belong to which tribe. And in that regard, there are 9.5 tribes left to assign their territory to. Now, that will bring us to the rest of this chapter and the remaining part of chapter 14. And hopefully we'll get to much of this. These chapters we're gonna more or less do from a bird's eye view, 10,000 feet, because we're not going to get into the nitty-gritty of names of cities and what cities refer to what and the archaeological finds, etc. I really want to just understand the theme of this part of the book, and therefore, kind of from a bird's eye view, we're going to look at the various chapters and what they deal with. But they are that's essentially the major theme of the second half of the Sefer. What tribes go where? And so I'm going to start with just a quick overview of the remaining chapters in this section. We're going to come back and deal with this in detail, but I want us to understand the structure here. Structure is very important. If we look at this chapter, we're going to jump momentarily to the next, but this chapter, remaining part of this perek in its entirety, deals with the 2.5 tribes east of the Yarden. Why does God command Yehoshua to divide the land amongst 9.5 tribes? I thought there were 12 tribes. Divide the land by the 9 tribes plus part of Manasseh. Because the other part of Manasseh and Reuven and Gad already received their portion. Meaning, if we're talking about dividing the land by which tribes would go where and which tribes knew where their quote-unquote home was, that has already happened with Reuven, Gad, and Manasseh. although the army is fighting still with Israel, and Yehoshua will not release the army of Reuben and Gad and Manasseh from their obligation until the end of the Sefer. But from a perspective of Chalukat Haaretz, the division of the land, Moshe already assigned the portions of Reuben and Gad on the east side of the Yarden, and that's what the next pasuk says. The Reuben, Gad, Menashe story was assigned by Moshe on the east side of the Yarden. And the remaining part of this parak, literally from Pasuk Tet till the end, will identify what the cities and the region of the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and Menashe are. Where were they assigned their territory? That's all parenthetical, because the major message here is to Yehoshua, Chalek et haaretz hazot, the remaining part of this land, you've conquered it, now it needs to be divided by tribes and settled. That's part 2. But only to 9.5 tribes, because 2.5 already received their portion. That's the story of the remaining part of the parak, all the way until the very end. Zot nachalat vehikvu b'nei Reuven, vayiten Moshe lebnei Gad. There's a portion for Reuven, there's a portion for Gad, there's a portion Zot nachalat b'nei Gad, then there's a portion of Menashe at the end of this. That's so all the inheritance that Moshe divided up on the east side of the Yarden, and Levi, of course, is not included, which tells me why there are 12, because Ephraim and Manasseh will each receive a portion of Yosef. And then chapter 14 will begin to describe the cities, the details of this Nachala division. So we had 2.5 on the east side of the Yarden, and now it's time to divide the rest of the land on the west side of the Yarden, which will be divided by their Nachla, by the inheritance, by tribe. And presiding over that process, presiding over that process in a very public way, was the role of the goral, the lots or the division of the inheritance by tribe, would be Elazar Kohen, who's the Kohen Gadol, and Yehoshua ben Nun, the leader, and the heads of the tribes, the Nesim of each tribe, because that's now their role, to assign the location for every tribe. And again, we're going to go back briefly over the 2.5 tribes that received their portion east of the Yarden. And then we're going to a little bit of a sidebar with regards to Kalev and the city of Hebron. We'll come back to that. And then chapter 15, Vahi Gorala Mateh B'nei Yehuda. So the portion assigned to Yehuda is the subject of chapter 15. What cities, what borders, what boundaries. We'll see the tribal territory when we get to the maps. That's chapter 15. Chapter 16, Vayitzeh HaGoral Livnei Yosef. The next tribe to be assigned their goral, their portion, their lot, is Yosef, but Yosef is a double portion. Yosef is Ephraim and Yosef is Manasseh. When it came to the land of Israel, Vayichalu b'nei Yosef, Menashe ve'Ephraim. There were 2 portions that were given to Yosef, got the double portion, a tribal territory for Manasseh and a tribal territory for Ephraim. And so the remaining part of this chapter, 16 and 17, will identify the tribal territory of the children of Yosef. V'yigvu b'nei Ephraim, the borders for the land of Ephraim, where they will be, what cities they will be. In chapter 17, V'yigaral Mateh Menashe, all of the cities and the boundaries and the borders of the tribe of Menashe. And embedded into these chapters, there are isolated stories. And most of these chapters read like a list of names, names of cities. But there are some various stories that are embedded into them, and we will, Bezrat Hashem, get to those stories as well. So chapter 13 is the tribal territory of Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh. 14 and 15 combined the stories of Kalev's request for the city of Hebron and the tribal territory of assigned to Yehuda. 16 and 17, the tribal territory assigned to Yosef, namely Ephraim in chapter 16, Manasseh in chapter 17. Then we get to chapter 18. We're going to go through these chapters one by one. I just want you to see the whole picture. Shiloh. Yehoshua gathers the entire congregation of Israel in Shiloh. And one of the questions that we're going to address in this course, this quarter semester, however you want to define it, is how, when, and why does the Mishkan move to Shiloh? Because this is the very first reference to Shiloh in this story. And up until now, they've been in Gilgal, beginning of chapter 18. There's suddenly in Shiloh, there's a new location of the Mishkan. Vayashkinu shamet oel moed. The Mishkan is placed in Shiloh. So park that question. It's a question we have to address. The land was conquered, but there still remain 7 tribes that have yet to take their land, to be assigned their land, assigned their territory, and settle therein. We had the 2.5 tribes of the east of the Yarden, and then we had, for the most part, Yehuda, Ephraim, and Menashe in the previous 14, 15, 16, 17, 4 chapters. And now chapter 18, Yehoshua turns to the remaining 7 tribes that have not yet received their nachla. And he says to them, there's a whole procedure as to how to do it. And at that point, the remaining part of this parak is going to be the tribal territory assigned to each of the remaining tribes in sequence. Binyamin, Lot and the cities, etc. Binyamin, names of all the cities, and then you have Shimon and chapter 19, and Zvulun and Yisachar, and remaining tribes: Binyamin, Yisachar, Zvulun, Dan, Naphtali, Asher, Shimon, all of the remaining tribes through chapter 19. So chapter 18 and 19, the remaining tribes. So between chapter 13 and chapter 19, I call it part 2 of Sefer Yehoshua, essentially is a description of what Chazal referred to as the years of Nachla. I'm sure you've heard the expression that Chazal define or divide up the entire period of time of Yehoshua into 7 years of conquest and 7 years of inheritance or settlement. Right? That's essentially the language that they use. 7 years of kibush, 7 years of nachla. This is the division. Up until Yehoshua Perek Bet is the 7 years of kibush, where we get the 7 years from. We'll see in a few minutes. And the remaining portion is the dividing of the chapter of the tribes. And the question that hovers over this whole sequence is the extent to which the tribes are successful or unsuccessful in settling their territory. That's the question. And we will address that, right? That's exactly the subject that we're going to have to look at, the more or less, the degree to which each tribe was more or less successful in the settling of their territory. That's the division. After that, but once we get to chapter 20, there's a couple of little pieces of unfinished business Yehoshua has to take care of before he departs, both physically and spiritually. He has to divide the cities of the Levites. He has to define the cities that are the cities of the Arei Miklat. And then he has to free the cities, the obligations of Reuven, Gad, and Manasseh to the other side of the Yarden. And that will take us to chapter 20, 21, and his final message to the people in the end of chapter 23, when he gathers them all together on Shechem for his final message and the end of his life. And that brings us to the end of the Sefer, Yehoshua, who dies in the end of chapter 24. So our mission as we begin to study this section of Sefer Yehoshua is to understand this is a whole new arrangement. This is a new arena now. It's not about the wars and the conquest. It's now focused on the tribes and their borders and the names of the cities and where they were supposed to go and whether or not they were more or less successful in settling and living where they were supposed to be.
Could you clarify something?
Sure.
Now, I know the division was done through the Urim, the Tumim, and through the Goral. but they
Correct.
had to be, the pieces of land had to be divided and brought in front of the Urim Tumim and asked, who does this part belong to? How was that done?
So hold the question. We will get to it in the beginning of chapter 18.
Okay.
It's a very good question. It's a very important one. It will be this. It's addressed in the beginning of chapter 18 directly.
Okay.
But so let's just hold on that question. It's an open question, a good question. What was the relationship between the role of the Goral or the Urim V'Tumim and the local cartographers who went and surveyed the land and divided the land, and how was the land originally assigned to which tribes, etc. So all of that will become much clearer at the beginning of chapter 18. Okay? So I'm not going to ignore the question. It's a major subject that we'll get to, Bezrat Hashem, but in a couple of weeks. So I want to take us back now to chapter 13 for a moment. In this introduction, Yehoshua is now being told his task has changed. We've moved from the time of kibush to the time of chalukata aretz, to divide the land by tribe. And then we have this aside that says that what he has to do is assign the land for the 9.5 remaining tribes, because 2.5 of the tribes received their land already on the east side. In other words, we're not talking about conquest, we're talking about tribal division. Reuben and Gad's land territory was already assigned by Moshe. And here the text digresses and repeats essentially psukim that we read in Chumash, when Moshe assigns to Reuven, Gad, and Menashe a portion of the land of Israel. And that's exactly what we read. We're going to see the map, and we're going to see the territory. Our air, Asher Svat Nachal Arnon. Here we get into the details of the map. Now, this is a very hard map to see. And so what I have prepared for you is this document, which is a little bit easier to see. And these maps are a little bit easier to read. So the first thing that Moshe is going to do, is that is described in these chapters, is the territory after it defines what areas were not yet assigned. I'm going to skip this map for a moment. It goes to the details of the tribal territory of Reuven, Gad, and Menashe. And this is on that source page that I gave you. It has all these maps. So the tricky part here is that you have to kind of have the map and the text open at the same time, which is a little bit of a challenge for me on this computer. Let's see if I can do this.
Can you give out the source pages again in the
I
chat?
did. It's in the chat. It's in the
Yeah, I'll
chat.
post it.
Okay,
If
thank
somebody could do that, that would be helpful.
Perhaps you could use just a map and we'll look at our own text. That might, well, everybody has a text.
Yeah, hang on a second. I think I can do this. Just have to remember. Okay, can you now see the two screens side by side?
Yes.
Okay, this worked. Wow. I'm waiting to figure out how to do that. Okay, so you can see the two windows side by side?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we could before as well. Yeah.
Okay. You could before as well? I'm not sure how that worked. Okay. So I'm going to leave this map here. We are going to work off this window here. What just happened? So this is a description of the territory of Reuben, Gad, and Menashe. So we start with the whole territory. Me'aroer, Asher Svat Nachal Arnon. If you remember the story, they conquered this area from Sichon. The Arnon River was the border. they had come around the territory of Moab. They had come to the Arnon River. They asked the king of the Amorite king, the name of Sichon, for permission to travel through his land. He refused to give it to them, and so they ended up with a battle in which Sichon lost. And this is the territory north of the Arnon River. The area that belonged to Sichon was essentially the area between the Arnon River here in the south and the Yabok River here in the north. This area here was more or less the territory originally belonged to Moab in the south and Ammon in the east, and it was the area of Sichon who had conquered it from Ammon and Moab, and Israel conquered it from Sichon. All of that's in Parshat Chukat. You have the city of Aroer, the city of Divon, V'chol arei Sichon, Melech Amori, all of the cities belonging to Sichon, the Amorite king, who reigned in Heshbon. Heshbon was the capital at the time here in the north. Ad Gavul ben Ammon, until the east border with Ammon. The Hagilad, the area of the Gilad, which is the area, the northern stretch, this green area with the mountain ridge, the northern stretch here. All of this is referred to as the Gilad. The west side of the Gilad was given to the tribe of Gad. The east side of the Gilad, for the most part, remained part of the tribe of Manasseh. והגלעד הוא גבול הגשורי והמאחתי בכל הר חרמון, all the way up to the area of the Hermon. All of that belonged to Sichon and Og. כל ממלכות Og מלך הבשן, אשר מלך באשתרות ואדרei. Og reigned in Ashtarot and Edrei. This is the area of the king of Bashan, of Og, the northern part, north of Nachal Yabok, up to the area of what is today the Golan Heights, all the way up to the Hermon. All of that is the tribe, is the area originally belonging to Og Melech HaBashan, conquered by Israel. Moshe conquered it and gave it to the tribes. All of that with the exception of the two areas here, the Geshuri and the Ma'achati, along the coast, along the valley of the Kinneret on the east side of the Hermon, which they were not able to conquer. רק לשבט הלוי לא נתן נחלה, אישי השם מלכי ישראל הוא נחלתו כאשר דיבר לו. Again, that comes back to the number of tribes. If you double Yosef into Ephraim and Manasseh, then you have to take Levi out because there's never more than 12 tribes at a time. That's the area of the east side of the Yarden assigned to Reuven, Gad, and Manasseh. And then the text goes into more detail. Okay, so that's the area as a whole, and we'll see with each of the tribes we'll have the same kind of sequence. It'll first define the borders overall, the area that was assigned to each tribe, and then it'll list the names of the cities. Now, listing the names of the cities gets very tedious, but it's necessary in Tanakh. Why? Because they didn't draw maps the way we draw maps. We draw maps, the line on a map. We take a map, we draw a line, we draw borders with lines on maps. They didn't have maps, and they didn't have lines on maps to define borders. Borders were defined by the names of the cities that were assigned or conquered. And so to identify the tribe of Reuben, you have to go through all the cities that were given to Reuben. To identify the area of the tribe of Gad, you have to go through all the cities that were assigned to Gad. And literally, there's a whole field of study of Tanakh, archaeologically, to identify where these cities were in ancient times. Many of them are familiar to us in modern times for a modern location, not necessarily the same location as it was at the time of Tanakh, but they are, for the most part, close. But that's the exercise here. Once we have the Gvul, we now need to define the cities. And that's what happens in chapter 15. Vaiten Moshe l'mateh Sorry, not chapter 15. We're still in chapter 13, and this is Pasuk Tedvav. Vaytem Moshe l'mater Reuven l'mishpochatam, to assign the cities to Reuven. Ve'hi lemegvu me'ar asher al sfat hanachal, the border down here. Ve'ir asher b'toch hanachal b'chol ha'mishor ad medva cheshbon b'chol ha'reah, and all of its environs and all of its cities. Divon ubamot Baal ubet Baal Maon v'yatza ukdemot umefaat v'kiryatayim v'sidma v'tzeret ha'shachar b'har ha'emek uvat po'or v'ashdod v'piska ubet ha'yishimont v'chol ha'rei ha'mishor. So again, we can go through the map and we can identify all these cities are. They're all listed here on this map. It gets very tedious. But that's the exercise in Tanakh. It's not tedious. It's critically important because there's no border on a map. There's no line here. There's just cities, and the Israelites have to settle those cities. They have to live in those cities in order to make a claim to those cities. Otherwise, they'll go back to the Canaanites who were there before. All of the cities of the Mishor and of the plains, and all the cities that belong to Sichon, and the kings of the Midianite kings that Moshe then killed in the battle with Midian after the story of Baal Peor, Evi vet Rekem, Etzur vet Chur vet Reva, who were the princes of Sichon, together with Bilam ben Beor, who was also killed at that time. And then it goes to the borders. Once you have assigned all the cities, now we can deal with the borders. This is the border of the children of Reuven, the Jordan River on the one side, the cities so identified on the other, all of the cities. Now I have the boundary, the borders, and the cities of Reuven. Check number one. Check number two. North of this line of Cheshbon was given to Gad. They were given the city of Ya'azer, which is a part of the battle of Sichon, and the west side of the Gilad, the Chatzi Eretz Bnei Ammon, Ad Aroer, all the way up to Aroer. And then it continues to the names of the cities, the names of the area. I'm going to skip a little bit. So Nachalat Bnei Gad, and then Vayten Moshe Lechatzi Shevet Menashe, the remaining portion was given to the half of tribe of Menashe. And they were given the following area from Machanaim. Let's go down to this map. From Machanaim, which is just north of the Yabok River. Anybody remember where Machanaim first received its name? This gets to a lot of repetition and a lot of review of Chumash. Machanaim was the first place Yaakov comes to on his journey back from the house of Lavan. He's coming to the land of Israel. He comes to his place. He sees angels again in his return to the land of Israel. He saw a camp of angels, and he called the place Machanaim. And then he crosses over the Yabok River, which is where he fights with Sarah Shel Esav. So all of that is happening here on the east side of the Yarden, between the Kinneret and the Yam Suf, the Nachal Yabok. Vahi gvula mimachanaim kol haBashan. Their borders, Menashe is Machanaim, all the way up to the Bashan. Kol mamluchot Og, Mechol Melech haBashan, Mechol Chavot Yair. All of the cities referred to as Chavot Yair in the Bashan. There are 60 cities that belong to Menashe in this area, Shishim Ir. They are referred to as Chavot Yair. And if you remember, we talked about this at the very beginning of our study of Sefer Yehoshua. It's quite possible that those cities were settled by Yair ben Menashe. Yair is Menashe's grandson. And it's quite possible that they are settled by Yair already at the time when Israel is still in Egypt, when Yosef's children, Ephraim and Menashe, had free reign in the land of Israel. Yair ben Menashe settles these 60 cities in this area. These are the areas that were assigned by Moshe on the east side of the Yarden. All except, again, 9.5 west, 2.5 east, and not including Levi. That's chapter 13. Any questions here? Okay, more or less, that's the easy part. Then we get to chapter 14. Chapter 14 continues along in exactly the same fashion with the description of the tribe of Judah. Now Yehoshua's task begins. Up until now, this is a description of what happened in the past. This was all done by Moshe. Moshe assigned Reuven, Gad, and half of Manasseh to this territory. Reuven and Gad, this area of Sichon, because that's where they conquered. Manasseh to the area of north, from Nachal Yabok all the way up to the Bashan, probably because they were already settled there. And now Yehoshua's task begins to assign the remaining tribes. So now we assign the tribal territory of the land of Israel to the remaining 9.5 tribes. Elazar HaKohen v'Yeshua ben Nun v'Roshei Avot HaMatot Livnei Yisrael. Assigned to them by Elazar HaKohen. You need the Kohen because in order to divide the tribal territory, you need the Goral, you need the Urim V'Tumim, as was mentioned before. You need the role of the Kohen. You need the role of the leadership, political and military, Yehoshua ben Nun. And because we're assigning territory to each tribe, it's critically important that you have representation of each Shevet. And so for the first time really in the Sefer, suddenly we come back to Roshei Avot HaMatot Livnei Yisrael, the heads of each tribe of Israel. And this assignment was done b'goral nachalatam, with a goral, a lot, a portion, a designation that has not just random throw lots type of thing. The goral is a reference essentially to some mechanism of the Urim V'Tumim. Exactly how it works, we don't know, but that is the concept. Kasher tzivah Hashem b'yad Moshe l'tishat hamatot v'chatzi hamata, as God had commanded to the remaining 9.5 tribes. And open parentheses, again, for the second reference, and it constantly comes back to this effort, to this message, which is that why are there only 9.5 tribes? Because 2.5 already received their portion by Moshe on the other side of the Yarden. And Levi is not included. Bnei Yosef were 2 tribes. Bnei Yosef, Shnei Matot, Manasseh v'Ephraim. Yosef gets divided into 2. And Levi is removed. In other words, the emphasis here is a very simple mathematical equation. There are only ever 12 tribes, 2.5 on the east side of the Yarden, 9.5 on the west side of the Yarden. 9.5 and 2.5 is 12, but that's really not fair. There are essentially 9 and 2, or 9 and 3. Okay, there are 13 tribes, because half of that's shared between the 2 halves. So Manasseh's on both sides. So
Yeah,
take
but
Manasseh,
Levi didn't get its own territory.
and Levi doesn't. So that's how you end up with 12. So if you focus on the children of Yaakov, you're going to get 12. If you focus on the tribal territory, you're going to get 12. Always. Levi, and in order to make that math work, you have to constantly reference the fact that Levi doesn't get land. And that's where we're up to, ready to go, ready to throw the goral and ready to start the process. 2 observations that I want to make in the time that we have remaining for today. The first is this reference to Kasher tzivah Hashem b'yad Moshe l'tishat hamatot v'chatzi hamata. This notion that this whole process of dividing the land, Yehoshua, Elazar Kohen, the heads of each tribe, and the goral, was already explained, defined, and commanded to by Moshe. That's not an accident. In fact, we know exactly where that takes place. This is part of the story in Chumash the one place in Chumash where the borders of the land of Israel are assigned to us, not by tribe, but bigadol in large, as an entire land, is in Bamidbar Parak Lamed Gimel. So I'm going to expand this for a moment. Can you see this expanded now? You see the whole screen text? So in Bamidbar Lamed Gimel, we find the following. וידבר השם ומשה בערבות מואב על ידי יריחו לאמור. דבר בני ישראל ואמרת עליהם, God commands Moshe east side of the Yarden, in Arvot Moav, he commands him saying, כי אתם עוברים את הירדן לארץ כנען, you're going over the Yarden to the land of Canaan, והורשתם את כל יושבי הארץ מפניכם. You shall conquer. Remember I mentioned at the beginning of the year the difference between lahorish and linachel. Lahorish, even though it comes from the word Yerusha, actually means to conquer, to remove the Canaanites from the land. To conquer the land from before them. And then deal with the cultural issues of the idolatry, destroy the high places, etc. You shall conquer the land. Vishavtemba, and then settle the land. Those are two. Even though the Ramban connects them from a mitzvah perspective, there's essentially two roles. There's the conquest, and there is the settle in land, divide the land by tribe. Ki lechem natati et haaretz laresh, I've given you the land to inherit, to possess. Vehitnachaltem et haaretz, you need to divide the land according to a nachal, according to a portion for each tribe. Begoral lemishpechotechem, each goral for each tribe. Larger tribes will have a larger portion, smaller tribes will have a smaller portion. The Rav Tabu et nachalato, the Lama Atamit et nachalato. The Im lo tavishu tishve'at, and then the Torah issues a warning, which is a warning that will come back to haunt Israel for the remainder of Sefer Yehoshua and a good part of Sefer, and nearly all of Sefer Shoftim, which is that if you are unsuccessful in part one and do not drive out all of the Canaanites, as we already saw, the text emphasizing to Yehoshua that there's many Canaanite enclaves still left behind, those who will be left will be will become like thorns and in your side. They will cause you trouble. They will harass you. They will be nothing but trouble, and both culturally and militarily. And therefore, command, as difficult as it is, to conquer the land. That's part one. But I want to go, sorry. So what we saw in this portion is that there's essentially two roles in the conquest of Canaan. There is lahorish, to conquer, and there is lihitnachel, there is to divide the land by tribal territory. And that's exactly the two roles that we've been seeing in the beginning of, in the two halves of Sefer Yehoshua. But then the command continues, Vayidaber Shalom Moshe lemor, literally next parak. You're coming into the land of Canaan. What are the borders? What are the boundaries? And we read these psukim at the beginning of our study of Sefer Yehoshua, because they define what I refer to as the box, the land of Canaan. What are the boundaries and the borders of the land of Canaan that we're now dividing by the tribes? I'm going to skip all of this because this is all the description of the various various region of the whole land. And this is the whole land of Israel. This is the land that God has commanded you to divide by goral. To give to the 9.5 remaining tribes. Sound familiar? Literally repeat. The Yeshua is a repeat of these psukim. Because Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh already received their portion. 2.5 portions east of the Yarden leaves 9 portions, or 9 plus, on the west of the Yarden. So far, what do we have? We have a command to conquer the land, to divide the land by goral, and to divide the land by Goral, by the tribes, for the remaining 9.5 tribes. We're not done. וידבר השם משה לאמור, אלה שמות האנשים אשר ינחלו לכם את הארץ. Who's going to do this division of the land? Who's going to assign this division of the land by tribes? So the answer is Elazar Kohen, Yehoshua ben Nun. The Kohen Gadol on the one hand, and Yehoshua on the other. The partnership between the military and the spiritual leadership of Israel, the Kohen and the Melech, will stand before the people and divide the land. But you're dividing the land by tribe, which means you have to have buy-in from each tribe. You have to have one prince, one leader. Then the word nasi is the equivalent of a head of a tribe. One leader for each tribe has to be part of that process. So when you, in that goral that assigns the territory, somebody asked that question earlier, how does that work? We'll see more details about it in chapter 18. But right from the outset, the Torah defines a process that includes the Kohen Gadol, Urim v'Tumim, the Melech, Yehoshua, king, and all the Nasiim. There has to be buy-in for each tribe. And these are the names of the leaders of the Nasiim who will divide the land. According to the tribe of Yehuda, this is the end of 40 years. The tribe of Yehuda will be led by Caleb ben Yefuneh, the tribe of Shimon by Shmuel ben Ammiud, the tribe of Binyamin ben Elidad ben Kisla, etc. And we have the list of all the Nasiim in generation 2. That's exactly what we're dealing with here. אשר ניחלו אותם לאלעזר הכהן ויהושע בן נון וראשי אבות המטות לבני ישראל. For here is the command, and here is the fulfillment of that command, to divide the land, the nachla, to tribal territory assigned to each tribe, by Elazar HaKohen, by Yehoshua the Melech, and by the heads of each tribe. When that is done, there can be no question left as to which areas belonged to which tribe. This is very public. This gets all of the elements of the leadership of Israel involved. And when it's done and the goral is finished, then every tribe knows exactly where their portion is. And the fascinating part of it is that in the history of Tanakh, at no point does any tribe ever, well, I can't say that for sure. Rare is the instance in which a tribe claims that another tribe is in their territory. You can have conflicts over leadership. There can be literally assassinations over who will be the melech. There can be civil wars over the national identity of the people, but no point in the history of Tanakh, with rare exception, there's one exception I can think of, but a rare exception, is there a question as to which tribe was where. Binyamin never comes and says, hey, I want to be here. Or Yehuda never comes and says, right, I want to be there. There's maybe 2 exceptions in the whole story. There's one story in Sefer Yehoshua in which Yosef Ephraim and Manasseh come to Yehoshua and they say, our land's not big enough. So Yehoshua assigns them an additional piece of territory. There's a similar story with Dan, who is unable to conquer their region in the coast. And so Yehoshua has to assign him a region up north. And there's one, maybe, we'll get to it eventually, one reference in Sefer Shoftim, a pasuk that might allude to a conflict over the role of a particular city in the tribe of in the Gilad. But other than that, no question ever arises in the assignment of the tribe and the land.
Not even Shimon.
So Shimon's fascinating. Shimon's fascinating.
Yeah, because he didn't get anything.
Shimon is not given land.
Right.
Shimon is given a handful of cities. We'll get to the tribe of Shimon. He's in chapter 18 and 19. He's assigned a handful of cities inside Shevet Yehuda, meaning Yehoshua
Mhm.
takes a series of cities from Yehuda and annexes them, takes them away from Yehuda and gives them to Shimon. No question, no challenge, right? It just happens. Years later, and this is recorded in Divrei Hayamim, the tribe of Shimon migrates. They are nomads, they're nomadic with their shepherds. They begin to migrate north. And so eventually they will exile with the northern tribes. And that's the reason why that happens has to do with the story of Shimon and the story of Benot Midian, which we will look at. But even that is an example of what I'm suggesting, which is that this process was so public and so clear and had such significant buy-in from the heads of the tribes and the Kohen and Yehoshua and the Goral and the Urim V'Tumim. All of that together created a division. And not only that, it also gets placed on top of a tradition, a Masoret, of which tribes would be assigned more or less where in the land of Israel. That goes all the way back to Yaakov. Because Yaakov, on his deathbed, when he gave his bracha to his children, more or less the purpose of that bracha was to assign the regions of each tribe in the land of Israel. So the question of who was where is a question that comes up, but it's not really a question that's disputed. And that's a fascinating observation. All right. So
you originally translated the word lahorish as conquer, and I think that's misleading. With respect, I think that's misleading. I think lahorish means to provide the correct target for the bequeathment.
no, I'm going to disagree with you. You are working off modern assumptions that the word lahorish comes from the word Yerusha. That's true in modern Hebrew. In biblical Hebrew, there's a difference between lahorish and lareshet. Lareshet in terms of the grammatical structure of the terms, but without question, the word lahorish in Tanakh is used to conquer or to I don't like to use the word that is often used in the translations here because I think it's in modern terms it's misleading. But the way it's translated here is lahorish is to drive out the inhabitants, meaning to conquer. And v'hitnachaltem is to settle by nachalo to assign a Yerusha. But
I should bow to
an inheritance as opposed to heritage.
I should bow to your wisdom. But
you can see in the beginning of Sefer Yehoshua also lahorish is to conquer.
The process that you have described in this wonderful Dvar Torah is of correct ascription of bequeathment to the correct tribes, and therefore the root of the word Yerusha that you say is no longer accepted, in my opinion, should still be accepted. With respect.
Okay, we can argue, get semantics, but I think you understand
it's very important. It's very important because you have validated it with your wonderful Dvar Torah.
The last thing I want to do is we're already over our time, so I'm going to stop here. But we are at Perek Yudalid, so the next week we will pick up. Actually, not next week because there's no class next week. In 2 weeks' time, to remind everybody, there's no class next week. In 2 weeks' time, we will pick up from Yehoshua Perek Yudalid. There's a little story, so we're going to interspersed in these description of tribal regions, land regions, and cities, which gets very tedious. There's 3 or 4 stories, vignettes. And those vignettes they stand out because of all the various stories to identify, to put into the story, right? Why in the middle of the list of cities of Yehuda do we have one conversation between Kalev and Yehoshua? Why in the midst of the conversation about the tribal territory of Menashe do we have one conversation of the daughters of Tzlafcha? So these little conversations and vignettes and observations become very important in the overall messaging, I believe, that goes beyond just the text and the list of cities. And they're the highlights that I really want to focus on. So next week we will talk about Kalev and Yehoshua and their relationship and the story of Kalev, and then we'll talk about piece by piece. We'll go through these little vignettes interspersed in these in this division of land and the names of cities and maps and territory. And stay with us. We'll have some fun.
Thank you very much. I think it was a fantastic Torah, even though I disagree with your philology.
Thank you, Rabbi.
My pleasure.
Rabbi, will we discuss the cities of refuge as part of the border or no?
Yes, they're at the end of the story. They're in they're at chapter
Okay.
21 and 22.
Right. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Thank you
Thank-
very much. Excellent.
My pleasure.
Thank
All
you. Have a good night. Thank you.
Have a wonderful evening. We'll see you in 2 weeks' time. No class next week.
Baruch Hashem.
Thank you so much. Excellent as always.
Thank you.
Todah Rabbah.